In this video, we talk about how we moved 100,000 pairs of boots and shoes over 4 months, making a total profit of $145,000.
So where did this deal come from?
Deal came to me from a friend who got it from an old customer of his who got it from the actual manufacturer of the boot. So it's one of those deals where one person didn't know what to do with it, called another person, and finally called the right person, someone who could move the whole deal.
What was the total units, cost per unit, and stuff like that?
Sure. So to answer the first question, why we got the deal, I think that's important, even though we kind of answered the question. The deal needed to be moved as a whole. So the manufacturer of the boots didn't want to piecemeal it out. He wanted one person to take the entire deal all at once, but also didn't want to be named as like why the boots were on the market. So they didn't care that the boots made it onto the liquidation market, didn't care that they got posted, didn't care how they got sold. They just wanted their name not to get tossed out there. So we were able to, give them that feeling of, we'll keep your name out of it, we'll move the boots quickly, and we'll take it all in to our facility rather than take up a lot of space in your building.
All right. So what was like the freight total and stuff?
Oh, you asked about the cost, all the costs of goods. So we roughly 100,000 units of shoes. We paid right at $165,000 and change. Freight was, this is where it gets tricky, it was 20 truckloads of boots and shoes. It was right at, I think 500 pallets, 400 pallets, somewhere in there. We were able to double stack a lot of it to save on freight, and thankfully we were local enough to where freight was fairly inexpensive, but we were still into freight around $10,000 to $15,000.
What about like labor?
So as far as labor goes, we had to unload all the trucks, and then what we did as far as sorting was they came in all jumbled. So boots were with shoes. There was 3 total SKUs, but we had to go in, we had to separate the different SKUs, as well as we had to make sure that every pallet had a count. So thankfully with the boots, they were all, roughly the same box size. So every pallet we were able to stack the same way and get 192 pairs of boots on a pallet. So those didn't require a count. The shoes, we had to gaylord those up. And initially we were counting every single shoe that went into the box. 2 problems this caused. One, I found out really quickly that people can't count very accurately. So we were paying people to count incorrectly. But then 2, what we ended up doing, we ended up counting 10 pallets out accurately, meaning I stood over, I helped count, and I made sure every shoe got counted. And we took the average of that, which ended up being about 135 pairs of shoes fit in the size gaylord we were using. So we charged clients just a flat 135 for 135 pairs per pallet. So the labor it took to do that, thankfully most of our labor was already there. This was the project for the week or for the month. We brought in a few extra hands to get certain orders out the door faster. When we bought the deal, we had several customers already in mind that we knew would take 5, 10, 15,000 pair at a time. And so as the trucks were landing initially, we were able to start processing those orders, which kept our space fairly free. Because it's still 400 pallets, 20 trucks. We weren't able to leave them all double stacked in the building. We had to unstack them so we could work them.
So what do you think your final all-in cost per unit was?
So we paid $1.60 roughly. After freight, we're gonna add in, if it was, round numbers, it was $15,000. That's another 10 cents. And then labor, all in, we were probably into these shoes for about $1.80, $1.90. give or take.
All right. Where did you start to sell? I mean, what was your strategy on that?
So the key to these big deals is knowing that you have buyers before you take it on. So we knew before we went into the deal, we knew we had close to half of the shoes already committed. So it did 2 things for us. We knew we wouldn't be taking up, 20 truckloads of space in our facility. We also knew our capital wasn't going to be out there for a really long period of time. But on top of that, so that was wholesale. We wholesaled most of these boots and shoes out between $4 and $5 a pair. We have a small retail location where we sold a small portion, probably 3,000 pair, but we maxed our value on those. We got about $10 a pair in the retail store. So going into these big deals, it's really important to have a plan of how you're going to distribute the product. And then I like to know when I go into these big deals, that I've got most of my cash back, within the first week.
Could you break down kind of your timeline?
So we finished up receiving the last of the product right at the day before Thanksgiving, because that was the agreement we'd made with the manufacturer. So we'd already started selling a lot of the shoes prior to landing the last of the loads. I'd say between November, December, we'd sold the vast majority of what we were going to sell last year. So we probably got through 60% of the deal within the first 2 months. December, the week before Christmas really starts dying off for a lot of people, us included. And then into January, we had a little bit of a slow start. I'd say the last 15,000 pair were all case packed. It took me a little while to get that last chunk of the deal gone. But even the last 10,000 pair before that, we had to get a little creative. We started auctioning them off through high bid. So it took us a solid 4 months to move it all, which is still very, very fast in my opinion. We're averaging 25,000 pairs of shoes per month. But to answer your question, that's the timeline. About 1 to 2 months in, we sold about 60% of it, 70% of it, and it took us the second 2 months to sell the last 30%.
All right, well, let's talk about the numbers. What do you think your total revenue was?
Yeah, so I wrote that down. That's one thing I didn't have memorized. So I estimate that we sold about $340,000 worth of shoes. Our cost of goods was $160,000 minus freight, minus the labor cost. We were all in about $145,000 profit over a 4-month time period. So a lot of work went into it. But overall, I'm fairly happy with the number that we ended up getting.
And if you had to do it all again, what would you change?
Yep. So I wrote down some notes on that. So I am going to read from this. A couple things I would change. I would have been into the deal for less money. So I know that sounds greedy. We made almost $150,000, but it's important when you go into these deals that you don't assume. I assumed I would get $5 across the board for all the shoes. That was a mistake. We ended up getting, closer to $3.40 after it was all said and done, because 100,000 of anything hitting the market saturates it fairly quickly. So that initial $5 we got, quickly after the first of the year turned into $2 to $3 a pair. So I think buying it a little bit lower would have given me the ability to sell it for cheaper in the beginning before the market got saturated and we ended up having to take less down the road. So I would 100% do that differently. If you're thinking about doing any of these deals this size, which is what we've started to kind of specialize in over the last takeaways, that's funny. So my takeaways on this deal, and if you're somebody that's been offered a deal like this and you're not sure if you should take it, I'll give you a couple tips. If you still don't want to do it, feel free to call me. I'll jump in, I'll help. But what I just said before is important. Buy in with the expectation that you will sell the goods for less than you assume. So again, I bought in, right under $2 with the assumption I would average a quick and easy $5, and we didn't. We averaged, closer to $3.40. So whatever you think you're going to sell it for, cut that number in half on deals this size, because you're going to saturate the market. Unless you're willing to stretch these deals out over several years, you're not going to hit your number. And I'm just not a believer in stretching out deals for that long. The next thing I would do, so thankfully we got lucky. This was a local deal. We've done these where they're farther away, but it's important to spend a little bit of time bidding out your freight, because on 20 trucks, thankfully we were able to double stack most of them. But even 10 trucks, if you can save, $300 a load working with a local driver, that's $3,000 over the course of the deal. That can go to labor, that can go to storage, that can go to anything else. So spend a little bit of time, spend a couple days bidding out the freight, getting the best freight rate you can. Let's see. And then double your labor. So one thing that, I'm not always the best at is I'm a cheapskate. I try to do more with less, but with deals like this, you want to be able to fulfill your orders very quickly. So, again, you have a small window where you saturate the market, and you want to make sure you're pushing as much product out as you can in that window. So make sure you double your labor, have these guys prepared to go at it, to work clear instructions. I mean, we made this as easy as we possibly could. You know, the boots were able to stack all the same. We didn't even have to count. As long as you're putting 12 to a layer and you're stacking it 16 layers tall, the count's always going to be the same. We quickly figured out that the best thing to do was to average the count on the Gaylord boxes instead of counting out each individual shoe. We had 0 complaints on counts. Everybody that received a load was happy with their count, which tells me we were within, you know, a small margin of error. So I would also be sure to prepare your relationships for the deal. What that means is, as soon as I was able to kind of lock in the deal to where it was mine, I immediately started making phone calls on the way back from that deal. We had about a 4-hour drive. By the time I got home, I had already had 20% of the deal committed out. And then by the next 2 or 3 days, we'd had everything else committed. So make sure that your buyers, if you can't write down, I think, on paper, your first 30% of the deal. So like in my mind, I'm writing down, you know, person A is going to buy 5,000 pair. I had 30,000 pair, you know, in my mind sold before I left the deal that day. So make sure you have that. I don't like to go into any deal. I'm not going into any deal that big, not knowing for sure I've got buyers for it. The last thing is, and this is kind of common sense, but make a deposit. Lock in the deal. Don't just, you know, don't agree to it and then, you know, waffle on sending over some money to lock it in. Lock it in before you start making phone calls, because a lot of these deals, they're so big, they're really easy to track down. And if you call a customer that's just as big as you run the risk of them, you know, backdooring you in a sense and going around and snaking that deal. So be sure, lock it up, show that you're serious, send that deposit over to your supplier, and then be sure to move quickly with these deals. These guys have a big problem on their hands and they want to work with someone who's going to make their lives easier. So that's pretty much it. That's kind of our TED Talk today, where we moved 100,000 pairs of boots and shoes over a 4-month time period, how much money we made, how we did it. If you have any other questions, please feel free to drop a comment below.